An important thing to note here is, and we're going to go into this more so in the resistance training, what we see is that through the use of myokines, they're muscle-based proteins, but BDNF is also a myokine. They're these hormones that get secreted from the muscle, and we can get them secreted during maximal exercise as well, and small bouts of it during aerobic, right? Because they get released when your muscles are contracting. You get more of them in resistance training. But through specific myokines, especially one called IL-6 and IL-10, what they do is they send signals to natural killer cells, and these natural killer cells are the things that can actually dampen the circulating tumor cells and from the tumor from actually progressing. Because tumors are alive, they also form their own vascular system. So we have to kill off that site. You have to kill off that vascular system in order to kill off the actual tumor and stopping it from going from stage 1 to stage 2.
All right. Well, this is a good segue into resistance training,
Oh,
the
yeah.
myokine piece. Let's talk about, we'll go from the top down and we'll move into myokines a bit more. But what are the benefits specifically for the brain of regular resistance training?
Oh, gosh. Well, the bigger the legs, the bigger the brain, apparently. That's a great analogy, right? Because what we see is that there's a wonderful study that was first done to show that people who have bigger quads have bigger brains. And so when I say bigger brains, let's talk about what that means. We've got both gray matter and white matter in the brain. The gray matter is predominantly our cortex, and that whole houses the cell bodies. Then the white matter is the myelinated part of the neuron. That's the axon of the neuron. When we talk about greater sizes in volume as it relates to the brain, what we're really talking about is you're getting more connections between the brain, and that's what we see on neuroimaging. So we've seen, and this is a paper that I authored. I was the first author on a wonderful paper that was released around 9 months ago now that showed that resistance training specifically can slow the decline of mild cognitive impairment. So what we see, and this was across 2 main studies, it was called the SMART study and the brain power study. What we saw is that whether you've got mild cognitive impairment or not, through resistance training at minimum of 2 days a week, you can increase the gray matter volume and you can decrease white matter lesions, because we can get lesions in the white matter of our cells. So how does this happen? Well, first and foremost, it happens through myokines. So myokines are muscle-based proteins. I refer to your muscles as the pharmacies and the myokines as the medications. And they're just stored in there. They're waiting to get released, and they get released under contraction. So you can imagine you contract your bicep, they get released, they go into the bloodstream, and then we have receptors on all of our organs. We have receptors in our brain. We have receptors in your prostate, which was a great study that was done in Cell Press we can talk about. You've got receptors on your heart that are waiting for these myokines to go in there. And when these myokines are excreted, they have multiple effects on immunity, on cancer, on our executive functioning. Our executive functioning lives in the prefrontal cortex of the frontal lobe of the brain. And that's responsible, that's the CEO of the brain. That is responsible for all of our functioning, from thinking, processing speed, memory, intellect, etc. And we can see greater effects on executive functions through these myokines. We can also see an even more of an expression. One myokine specifically is called irisin. It's a messenger molecule. So it basically helps BDNF express itself. It delivers more BDNF. So that's another great tool. But quite specifically, I love the prostate cancer myokine research, where they showed that you can inhibit tumor cell growth in the prostate from myokines.
All right. Just to understand the myokine piece in a really general sense, in the muscles, we have these myokines, and they sit there until we contract the muscle. Then they get ejected out into circulation and act on different areas in the body.
Yeah.
So does everybody have these myokines, even people that are sedentary, in the muscle waiting to be used?
They sure do.
And what happens if somebody doesn't use those? Do they become recycled? Do they just sit there indefinitely?
They just
I
sit
just
there.
want to
Yeah.
talk about the spectrum here of somebody that's actually using them versus just sitting there.
Well, they just sit there. And I mean, look, I don't think we've gone into that deep of the research to think like what happens to them. I mean, they're sitting there, they're waiting, but they don't get released unless you release them. Just to give you a picture of how important these are, pharmaceutical companies are spending billions upon billions of dollars trying to mimic these. The New York Post released this stupid article about a week ago now, saying that they've now figured out an exercise pill. They're really trying to replicate BDNF in a pill, but they just can't. Billions of researchers going into it. They just can't, because they know if they did, this would be the end of so many major diseases, but probably the end of exercise as well.
You mentioned the fact bigger the legs, bigger the brain. It gets me thinking about different muscles in the body and myokines. Are they dispersed more out from the legs, or is it in general throughout the whole body?
Yeah, look, it's dependent per vector size. So you've got to think of your quads. So your quads are 4. There's way more quad muscles. It literally lives in the myocytes. So there's more muscle fibers, more muscle cells in the quad than there are in the biceps. So there's more myokines that live in there. And then there's also another fact that I think we have to talk about. And this relates to cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. We know that there's a distinct correlation between type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. You know, how the brain is able to uptake lactate and how able to uptake glucose. We know that that's impaired during mild cognitive impairment and these diseases. Mitochondria, the more efficient the mitochondria, I know you've had my good friend Casey Means on the podcast, and she probably spoke about mitochondrial dysfunction. Mitochondria in the brain serves as a really, really important purpose. And we know that through exercise, we can improve mitochondrial efficiency. But the more muscles that we have, the bigger the muscle, the more mitochondria we have. So you're effectively doing so many things than just secreting myokines, right?
When it comes to myokines, I do want to leave them soon, but just to get the full picture here, when we're walking, are those being extracted from the muscle, or what kind of force is needed over what period of time to get maximal dose?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we can see that we can get some BDNF, but let's just say there's around 1,000 myokines, right? Predominantly when you're walking and when you're running, you're only really secreting BDNF, and mild lactate is one, and cathepsin B and IL-6. But to get the true benefits, you do have to lift heavy, and heavy means around 80% of your one repetition max. So let's think, right? You're doing a deadlift, and let's just, for argument's sake, let's say your one repetition max, that's the maximum that you can lift in one rep, is 100 kilos. You want to make your exercise sessions based around that. So you want to be looking at around lifting 80 kilos for 6 reps for 4 sets, 2 to 3 times a week. That makes, and that's, by the way, Jesse, that's hard. Like 80% of your one repetition max. I don't know if you've done that, but like just squatting that is really hard to do.
Yeah, it's not doing air squats and pull-ups and push-ups. You
No.
really got to push it.
And look, that's where, this is my issue. Being a woman, also seeing my mother, right? You know what she did, Jesse? We have a strict rule, and they live in Australia. A strict rule. Like I tell them, I'm not coming home for Christmas unless I see like some work being done in the gym. So mum went out and bought weights on her own so she could really be like, look, I'm doing what you say. I looked at the weights, and this was on Zoom. They were pink, and I swear they were like 2 kilos. I was like, that's not doing anything. And it pains me to see women, and probably men too, going into the gym and lifting these tiny weights that are just not doing anything for them. You have to lift heavy. And then we can go into probably the myths around this. But a lot of women think, if I lift heavy, I'm going to become a bodybuilder. And it fascinates me, because I'm like, I try so hard to put muscle on. I lift heavy. I guarantee you're not going to be putting a lot of muscle on. Just get to the gym 3 times a week.
All right. So other than myokines, other benefits people get from resistance training?
increases in strength and hypertrophy. A really great study that came out of China that showed that as little as a 10% difference, asymmetric difference in hand grip strength, which was measured via something called a dynamometer, which measures your hand grip strength. This is a proxy for overall strength. You have mild cognitive impairment. So basically, what you're thinking about doing when you go to the gym is not just, I'm going to get improvements in body composition. You're also increasing strength. Strength is so necessary as we age across the board for both men and women. The CDC put out a statement saying that the number one cause of death amongst 80-year-olds is falls. So when you are strength training, you're strengthening all areas and all facets of life, right? You're preventing falls, you're increasing muscle mass, you're increasing strength, you're increasing brain size, you're helping with your neuromuscular system. We have the reason why we can lift and push is not because of your muscles, it's because of your brain. And we have this connection, the neuromuscular system at the neuromuscular junction, right? So if your brain sends a signal down to your upper motor neurons or your lower motor neurons in order to lift heavy things, if you stop doing that, you lose that signaling from the brain. You lose it. You just do not, and it's very hard to recruit it back again. You almost never do that. And your brain kind of has this theory, use it or lose it. And the reason why we seep into cognitive decline as we age is because we stop engaging in things such as this, things that are hard for us, things that are difficult for us. So I think that resistance training is like a panacea for overall health.
For somebody that has neglected this area up until this point and say they're 40, 50, 60, and their interest is piqued hearing about the different benefits from the different kinds of exercise, what would be the most simple way to break down what we've explained to this point into a program for people? And also, additionally, is there anything else in the exercise realm we want to add to that?
The great news is the more sedentary and less fit you are, the greater benefits you're going to get to start with. So we can see benefits with 70-year-olds who have never lifted a weight before getting the same benefits that I would in terms of percentage, right? From doing a wall squat, just, or air squats really, or walking. My theory is you've just got to start, right? You've just got to start. If you are either overweight, BMI is super high, you're really unfit, start with walking, 15-minute walking around the block, right? I'm not going to even get into the psychological aspect of this because I know that it's hard. I understand it's hard to get out there. I'm not going to get into the motivation. However, you just have to start. And you don't even have to go in and start lifting weights. Actually, probably the worst thing you could do from a psychological factor is go and lift heavy weights to start with. Start by doing, can you do an air squat? Can you do a push-up? That's the first thing. Calisthenics is great. And then you want to work your way up. And you generally want to work in around 6-week efforts, right? Because that's what generally when, I don't know how you categorize your routine, Jesse. Like, I don't know if you up your weights every 6 weeks, but, hopefully you've got a training adaptation and you want to increase it over the next 6 weeks. So that's how I generally start with beginners as well. Just do what you can. And then what's really great, I bought these for my parents, whether they're using them or not, are resistance bands. They're fantastic.
But coming back to the myokines, we're talking to the beginner here with a lot of this. They're not going to get a lot of those benefits.
Not to
like
start
you
with.
mentioned, you have to get to, was it 80% of your maximum to get those fully expressed?
Fully expressed, yes. However, don't forget, you're still getting the BDNF from getting out there and running. And that BDNF, we haven't even gone into Alzheimer's pathology. I don't know if you want to, but we do have research to show that we can get rid of these, eliminate. I've been trying to think of the word eliminate this whole episode. We can eliminate some of the plaques that are built up in Alzheimer's disease, which is amyloid beta, through BDNF.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
Your brain cells really have this notion of supply and demand. It's under so much demand every day, from work stress to environmental stress. But if you have a lot of supply through ketones and through sleep,